There we go. All right. I would assume most of you know by now that I grew up in Kansas.
No.
I've mentioned that a few times.
We appreciate you telling.
Well, just in case there's somebody, we're all getting up there, so I figure one of these days I'll forget that I was from Kansas. So, when we first moved down here to Texas, we lived in an apartment community in Round Rock outside of Austin. And I quickly discovered that here in Texas, y'all have this irritating little insect that we don't have up in Kansas. The fire ant. Oh no, we got chiggers down there. But the fire ant. We don't have fire. We have ants. We don't have fire ants up there. When they were outside, they were bad enough. But the fire ants there in Austin had a way of coming into the apartments. And they'd come in, you'd just be sitting on the floor. I'd be sitting on the floor with my feet stretched out, and suddenly they'd just start biting my leg because I couldn't see them in the carpet. And there was one time that we went in to put our oldest to bed and pull back the covers, and it was solid fire ants under the covers. So we had issues with fire ants there. But it didn't really take me very long to begin to wonder just why it was that God had created fire ants. Why did there have to be fire ants? And I'll be honest with you, I still wonder that, And over the years, I've asked the same question in one way or another a lot of different times. Especially whenever a metaphorical fire ant came uninvited into my life to ruin what otherwise would have been a perfect situation. Paul dealt with this very same problem. He called it his thorn in the flesh. He learned how to deal with it in such a way that it took him to a whole new level spiritually. So tonight I want us to look at what Paul said about it, and in the process, maybe we're going to learn a little bit, learn a new way, if you will, to look at some of our biggest problems. We're going to be looking, at 2 Corinthians chapter 12. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Paul's in the middle of what you might call a rant directed at some of the teachers who were causing division in the church in Corinth. And they were leading the people in the wrong direction. Bible scholars talk about how these leaders commended themselves, bragged about their own achievements. They were wallowing in this culture of fame and success and showmanship. It's a good thing that there aren't any churches or Christian personalities that try to do that today, isn't it? So in chapters 10 and 11, Paul complains about their behavior, and he defends his authority as a leader in the church as an apostle of Jesus Christ. In chapter 12, he talks about an incredible spiritual experience that he had experienced, though he refers to himself in the third person as he relates it. This experience was a vision in which he was caught up into paradise, and he saw inexpressible things that man was not permitted to talk about, to tell. And his point in talking about this was to say, these false teachers brag about their spiritual dreams and visions and experiences, but I want you to know I've had the greatest of them all, and I don't really ever talk about it. And then he said in verse 6, 2 Corinthians 12, verse 6, "For if I want to boast, I will not be a fool, because I will be telling the truth. But I will spare you so that no one can credit me with something beyond what he sees in me or hears from me. And then Paul goes on to talk about his thorn in the flesh and what he was able to learn because of it. And this is where I want to focus tonight. We may not share Paul's experience of being caught up into a third heaven, but we do share his experience with thorns, with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, difficulties. And as he describes toward the end of the chapter, and hopefully we can learn the same lessons that he learned from life's biggest problems. So we're going to continue on here in chapter 12. I'm going to start in verse 7, verse 6 kind of stopped, and so I'm going to pick up with 7 and then read through verse 10. It says, especially because of the extraordinary revelations. Therefore, so that I would not exalt myself, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to torment me, so I would not exalt myself. Concerning this, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Therefore, I will most gladly boast all the more about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may reside in me. So I take pleasure in weaknesses, insults, catastrophes, persecutions, and in pressures because of Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So, a thorn in the flesh. What does that mean? We often think of a thorn as a splinter, some kind of a little annoying sliver of wood that we get in our finger, that gets under our skin, and it just really irritates us. But from what I've been able to see online in some of the commentaries, the Greek word more accurately means a stake. The kind of weapon that was sometimes used to kill criminals. In other words, Paul was saying, this thing is big, and it can really do some damage. So what was this thorn? What was this stake that tormented Paul? He never says. That hasn't stopped scholars and biblical teachers from speculating for the past 2,000 years what that might be. John Calvin believed that Paul's thorn was the temptation to doubt. Martin Luther believed the thorn was persecution. Others believed that it was his physical appearance, that he had some kind of deformity. Others guessed that it was epilepsy, which is why he had visions and trances, while others thought that it was that he had severe headaches. Another theory is that he suffered from recurring symptoms of malaria since he spent so much time at sea. Many others believed that it was eye trouble. They say that when he was struck blind on the road to Damascus, he never fully recovered from that, was never fully healed. That God allowed the eye problems to stay with him for the rest of his life, as a reminder of his first encounter with Christ. They say that that's why he said the Galatians would have plucked out their own eyes and given them to him. And why he finished the book of Galatians by saying, see what large letters I make writing with my own hand. So there are all kinds of speculation about what Paul's thorn in the flesh actually was. So what do I believe? I believe that Paul didn't tell us. Okay? And I think he didn't tell us for a reason. It's not important what the thorn in the flesh was. It's important what the thorn taught him. There are 5 things about thorns that I want us to look at tonight. As I said, this is going to hopefully give us a whole new insight into what we think it might be some of our biggest problems are. And it'll show us how to experience God's power when we least expect it. So the first thing that I want you to see is that thorns provide a necessary balance. Look back at verse 7. It says, especially because of the extraordinary revelations. Therefore, so that I would not exalt myself, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to torment me, so I would not exalt myself. Now, this is one of the sad results of our fallen nature. Without the thorns of life, I think we would have a natural tendency to get a little too full of ourselves. People who experience success after success after success, who are always on the receiving end of praise and adoration from their adoring fans, tend to get conceited and self-centered. That can even happen spiritually. I've known people who have had powerful experiences with the Holy Spirit, and afterwards they became quite self-congratulatory about it. And that's not a good thing, which is why God, in His mercy, often intervenes. He sends a situation into our life to bring us back to reality. The truth is that we do need thorns, little ones and big ones, from time to time. We do need life's difficulties to help us keep things in perspective. And here's something that I've learned. The deeper I get in with God, the more He uses me in my ministry, the more annoying the thorns become. But they're a necessary part of life, and they serve a purpose. And here's the second thing that we need to see. Specific thorny details are best kept to yourself. Paul never disclosed the identity of his thorn, and I think that's a pretty good model for all of us to follow. People don't really need to know what your thorn in the flesh is. Do I have a thorn in the flesh? Yes, I do. More accurately, thorns. Okay? Many of them. I'm a rose bush without the roses. Okay? There's no point in getting into a thorn bragging competition. Oh, you think your thorn's bad? You should hear what my thorn is. Okay? Try living with that for a while. It's not a contest. The idea is not to go on and on about the power of the thorn. The idea is to use it as an opportunity to experience the power of God. I'm sure everyone here has some kind of a thorn in the flesh, something that you would consider a thorn in the flesh, maybe even a big one. And like the Apostle Paul's thorn, sometimes it hinders you from doing the work that you're called to do. Sometimes, like the Apostle Paul's thorn, it torments you. Rather than going on and on about it, I recommend that you deal with it like Paul dealt with it. And that brings us to the third thing that I want us to see. The right thing to do is to first pray for the thorn to be removed. Look at verse 8. It says, concerning this, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times to take it away from me. Paul said that he prayed 3 times for the thorn to be removed. I pleaded with the Lord, he said. Now, some scholars say that 3 times was only symbolic, meaning that he prayed about the thorn repeatedly. Others say that 3 is literal, that he prayed about it 3 times, period. Okay? And that on these 3 separate occasions, Paul made a focused effort to pray about this matter, asking God to take it out of his life. We simply need to understand that we can do the exact same thing. When a big problem comes into our lives, you can start by asking God to remove it. Okay? It's as simple as that. And most of the time, He does. For the overwhelming majority of problems and difficulties that come into your life, if you ask for God's intervention, He will miraculously remove it. Or He'll give you a means to solve it so that the problem is no longer there. I'd say that probably happens at least 90% of the time. But there are other times when a situation comes into your life and you pray about it, and the answer you get from God isn't really the one that you're looking for. That's what happened to Paul. A thorn in the flesh came into his life, and he asked God to remove it. But God responded by saying, in effect, you know what? I'm not going to remove it. I'm going to give you the power to endure it. So whenever a problem comes into your life, it's good and it's right to pray about it first. And you can pray about for whatever you want to happen. That's why Paul said in Philippians 4:6, don't worry about anything, but in everything, through prayer and petition with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Doesn't make any difference what your thorn is, what you think it may be. You can take it to God. You need to pray about it. Present your requests to God. Tell Him what you want. But understand that while you're doing this, just be aware that sometimes His answer will be different than what you request. Sometimes He'll say, there's a reason why this situation is in your life. There's a reason why it needs to stay with you for a while. And here's the next thing that we need to see. Thorns inspire reliance on God. What did Jesus say to the Apostle Paul? Look in verses 9 and 10. It says, but He said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. And then Paul went on to say, therefore I will most gladly boast all the more about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may reside in me. So I take pleasure in weaknesses, insults, catastrophes, persecutions, and in pressures because of Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Paul's saying, in effect, when this thorn seems like it's getting the best of me, it drives me to rely on God more than ever, because I can't beat it in my own strength. But what I've learned is that when I rely on God, I have all the power that I need. That's why in the letter to the Philippians, Paul didn't say, I can do everything through my own strength. No. He said, I'm able to do all things through Him who strengthens me. And it's why he said in Ephesians that Christ is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to His power that is at work within us. It's the thorns in life that drive us to rely on God more than ever. The more you rely on Him, the more you experience His power. And then here's the fifth thing that I want us to see. Thorns aren't nearly as bad as they're made out to be. Listen again what Paul said. I'm going to read verses 9 and 10 again. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Therefore, I will most gladly boast all the more about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may reside in me. So I take pleasure in weaknesses, in insults, in catastrophes, in persecutions, and in pressures, because of Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Paul's not just talking here about his giant, secret, unnamed thorn in the flesh. I think now he's talking about all the different types of thorns and problems that we all experience. Weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, difficulties. He said, I delight in the thorns of life. I delight in the problems that come my way. I delight in those things that demonstrate what my weakness is. Because in the very same moment, they also demonstrate the power of God. There may be some problems that come into your life that on the surface appear to have the power to wipe you out. They appear to have the power to close the door on your future. Or at the very least, they have the power to close the door on your peace of mind. Financial problems, health problems, marital problems, kid problems, boss problems, employee problems, customer problems, car problems, traffic problems, and on and on. The thorns are bigger than you are. There's no question about that. But if you approach them in the right way, they don't close the door on anything. In reality, they open the door to a deeper experience of God's power. So what's the key to His power? It's relying on Him in our weakness. Often we go about dealing with thorns the wrong way. When they come into our lives, we kick and scream and complain, and we get frustrated at our own weakness. And we resist what God's trying to accomplish through the situation, and we do anything but rely on Him. When you're weak and resistant, you're just weak. When you're weak and reliant, then you're strong. That's why Paul said, therefore I will most gladly boast all the more about my weaknesses. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses. That's the paradox of God's power. When you come to Him full of yourself, there's no room for anything else. But when you come to Him empty, He can fill your life with His presence and with His power. Thorns of all shapes and sizes are a fact of life. Some of them are little, tiny, annoying splinters. Some of them are giant, unbearable, impaling stakes. All of them have the power, at times, to knock us off our feet. And I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. If you've got problems that are bigger than you are, what we need to do, rather than complain about it or even brag about it, we need to start praying about it. We need to see what God wants to do. Maybe it's just there for a season. Maybe it's there for a different reason. Whatever the case, whatever the cause, use it as an opportunity to rely on God more than ever. In your weakness, find the strength of God. And the strength of His grace is really all that we need to get through anything that life happens to bring our way. Take out your prayer sheets, if you would.